I'd like to now call this meeting to order of the Coventry Town Council at 6:06 PM. Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Pasqua is absent this evening. Councilmember Ludwig.
Here.
Councilmember Shockley.
Here.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Here.
President Lima.
Here, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Emergency evacuation plan. In the event of an emergency, those present in public here this evening can exit out door number 1 or 2 into the back parking lot or the front lawn of Town Hall. Moving on to meeting minutes from prior meetings. Item A, August 22nd, 2023, open session. The updated version, it's listed twice. I think we just mean the one version. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm seeing 22nd and 23rd. Okay, got it. Do I hear a motion to approve the open session minutes of August 22nd, 2023?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Vice President LeBlanc, second by Councilmember Shockley. Discussion. Councilmember Ludwig.
I had one addition that I wanted to make to the 23rd. Does that mean we need to?
I'm doing that one separately.
Oh, okay.
Yep, this is just 22nd.
Just what I said. Thank you.
Yep. Any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Ludwig.
Yes.
Councilmember Shockley.
Yes.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Yes.
President Lima.
Yes.
In the affirmative, 0 in the negative, motion passes.
Do I hear a motion to approve the updated version of the August 23rd, 2023 open session minutes?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Vice President LeBlanc, second by Councilmember Shockley. Discussion. Councilmember Ludwig.
Thank you for sending in the highlighted portions for the clerk to add to the minutes. One thing that I did want to mention is that in the last almost 3 years that I've been on the council, I've never, I've never questioned friendly amendments before. And I was disappointed that the amendment or the recommended amendment to Joanne was not brought up to the rest of the council. And I had to specifically ask what that amendment was. I've never asked for anyone else's words to be changed unless I actually asked in the session, would it be okay if we changed or clarified something? And so what that does is it makes me question any of the amendments that now get sent to Joanne. Are they really friendly or not? So now personally, and maybe for other counselors, now I need to understand what's actually being sent into Joanne as considering a friendly amendment since it wasn't read out. So I don't know how we kind of resolve that going forward, but I'd like the courtesy if someone's trying to update something that I've said that's more than just a spelling change. I'd like to be consulted or at least say, this is what was said. Can we have this in? And of course I would say yes, it's on videotape. I don't have any problem with it going in the record. So I would like to ask the courtesy from the council for that.
So I would say that the understanding of a friendly amendment is purely, from my perspective, in my 15 years of using Robert's rules, is grammatical, spelling. If a word is missing in for context, sometimes the word might not be there to make something coherent, but nothing to the sense of the overall context or the meaning. That's my interpretation of friendly amendment. So I think going forward, if we can set that tone that friendly amendment is purely grammatical in nature, then I think that we can level set there.
I would appreciate that. And then I won't have to ask for every single amendment that's gone through in the council meeting and have the public have us hash through that either. So thank you.
That's fair.
The only amendment that I wanted to ask is if I could have one item added. So I wanted to make a motion to add one item. So this would be to line 254. It's on page 25 of the packet or page 6 of the notes. So after the first sentence that ends in making those tough decisions, I specifically referenced the reckless comment. So I wanted to have that added. I'd like added, she commented she was unsure if it was an accusatory tone with the referral of the term reckless that was previously stated. And I watched the YouTube, and that is almost verbatim what I said. So I'd like to offer that as one amendment to add that line in after those tough decisions on 254.
So we have an amendment on the floor from Councilmember Ludwig. Do we hear a second?
I'll second.
Second from Councilmember Shockley. Discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Ludwig,
Yes.
Councilmember Shockley,
Yes.
Vice President LeBlanc,
Yes.
President Lima.
Yes,
4 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, motion passes.
we're back to the minutes as amended. Any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Ludwig,
Yes.
Councilmember Shockley,
Yes.
Vice President LeBlanc,
Yes.
President Lima.
Yes.
4 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, motion passes.
Moving on to public comment on docketed items. Are there any members of the public present who'd like to make a public comment on a docketed item this evening? Here in council chambers? Any members of the public on Zoom? Public comment on docketed items only. Raise your hand and state your name and address for the record. Going once. Going twice. 3 times. Public comment is now closed. At this time, we'll move on to joint workshop with the Town Council, Planning Commission, and Zoning Board of Review. I would say all agendas were filed for both of these boards for tonight as well, correct?
Yes, they were.
So should we open those meetings?
Yes,
Okay, do you want to start with planning?
sure.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'll, just to begin the night, let's have a call to order and a determination of a quorum. First, we'll go with the planning commission. Alex has a mic just so we can get it on Zoom and get it on the record.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission joint meeting Tuesday, September 26, 2023 at 6:13. For the record, we have a quorum of 8. We have one person out with an illness, Mrs. Alderkin. Thank you.
Bring it right over to the chair.
Yes, I'd like to call the record. We zoning board of review. We have, as required, we have 3 members here, so we have a full quorum. I thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. My name's Doug McLean. I'm the planning director for the town of Coventry. I'm going to give a very brief overview on how we got to this point, and then I'll turn it over to our project consultant to go through the majority of their presentation and overview. This began when Coventry submitted a request for technical assistance in early June to a new program offered by Rhode Island Housing, and it's called the Municipal Technical Assistance Program. So we were pre-approved through that program, allowing us to select a consultant from a specified list of their program, about a dozen consultants total available. And we selected Weston and Sampson. We did this based on their unique knowledge and familiarity with the new state laws. I thought it was important to give, as part of this introduction, just a path of travel of that. Normally, the town council would be familiar with any, financial decisions made for the town. In this case, no money for this program is actually passing through the town of Coventry. Essentially, we applied to Rhode Island Housing for free consultant assistance, and we don't have a contract, although we certainly have a scope of work, and they're essentially working for Rhode Island Housing. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of the path of travel of how we arrived with this consultant and where we are today. The project manager from Weston and Sampson, Ashley Sweet, is here. She has been tracking and working on this state legislation from its initial inception at the state committee level. So she's someone that through Rhode Island APA, the Rhode Island Planning Association, has been tracking this even before it was adopted. And she has been working diligently since it's been adopted to better understand how municipalities can best adapt and engage with this new state law, making sure that our code does the best that we can to protect our interests. So for us, it was a no-brainer to pick a consultant that had the best knowledge set of this state law. We're fortunate to be in the position we're in because soon after we were pre-approved and only a few other communities in the state were pre-approved, Rhode Island Housing essentially shut the door and said they were overwhelmed with applications for assistance. And they decided to only allow those few communities that were pre-approved to move forward directly with a consultant assistance. Everybody else is waiting for a kind of broader, generalized state guidance before they're allowed to move forward with their own requests.
Are you saying we had our act together so well that we were able to take advantage of this opportunity?
We got lucky. We got lucky. There were, to our knowledge, 2 to 3 other communities that were in this fortunate position. They got their application into Rhode Island Housing early enough to be pre-approved early enough before they shut the door. The Rhode Island Housing asked for us to share the consultant because this was a unique opportunity we had, a unique resource that wasn't being made available to everybody. And because of that, this is a unique project. Essentially, the consultant is being shared with 3 communities: Coventry, Lincoln, and Cumberland. To the best of our knowledge, there may be one other community, but it's not clear if they actually ended up moving forward with selecting a consultant through the program. But we're in this fortunate position to have a consultant to be able to assist us to be prepared, because essentially all of these code changes that we're going to describe in more detail and Ashley will walk through, a chunk of them we need to address before January 1. If they're not addressed before January 1, we could be in a very tough position for applications that will be coming in without having the correct code in place to get the information we need and to direct those applications appropriately. So that's, enough background on how we've gotten here. I'll just suggest that the intent of this night is just to be introductory and conversational in nature. There are obviously some materials were provided. A new handout was provided that we'll go through in more detail. Ashley will give the bulk of the presentation, but there'll be some local policy considerations of which I've weighed in, and they're in the rear section of this document, and that we might kind of go back and forth in the Q&A. I think the goal is to give everybody, the council, the zoning board, the planning commission, an opportunity to try to digest this material, ask any initial questions they have. What we're taking away from tonight is just some initial direction. We have some ideas, we have some initial direction. We want to make sure we're heading in the right place, because the next time you see this at a joint work session in about a month's time, we will have code language drafted, and that's how quickly we need to move. We need to have all the zoning code language drafted in less than a month and in front of you, and be discussing that again. At the next time we discuss it, it will now have code language drafted. It will be an informal work session, October 24th, where we envision inviting these same groups back. You'll be able to discuss it, but at that point, any ideas for changing it will have to earmark for the hearing. This is still, it would be an informal opportunity to digest it, ask questions, think through if there's something that you might not agree with, but then we're earmarking everything for the hearing, if that makes sense.
So just for the process moving forward, Director McLean, if I could, and board members, I think we have so much information in front of us, and I know you've got a meaty presentation. Probably what would work best is if we let you and the team go through the entire presentation. If people have questions, if they can write them down, and then we can do that all at the end.
Not a bad idea.
Okay.
And we do have Alex Berardo. He's the principal planner for the town. He's got a mic. Any of the board members, if you have a question, just raise your hand. It could be, honestly, it's not a bad idea that we just go through all the materials, save the questions for the end, because there's a lot of information and you might end up changing your question by the time you hear it all. But raise your hand. Alex is going to bring the mic right over. This is meant to be just a discussion between these 3 boards. If there are members of the public that are watching and they have questions, I would suggest we have materials available online for the town council packet. Review that, and you can email my office if you have any follow-up questions. But tonight's discussion of the workshop is really just focused on these 3 boards and their opportunity to ask questions of the consultant and of the process in general. So,
There's appetite at the end from the council. Maybe we can have another public comment if we feel it's necessary as well.
Yeah.
All right.
so with that being said, I've concluded my part. I'll turn it right over to Ashley Sweet. However you feel comfortable.
Yeah, just move the microphone so people on Zoom can hear you.
To people, that would be helpful. Good evening. As Doug said, my name is Ashley Sweet. I'm a project manager with Weston and Sampson. I have Logan Leeds here with me today. He's a planner in our planning group within our organization. And we are here to, as Doug said, kind of go through high level, the project approach and give you an overview of the bills and what the impact is at the local level, and then, go through with you some of the policy considerations, trying to get some direction from you so that as we're drafting this language pretty quickly, we don't have to do it with unknowns in there. There are some places where the town has some to make some determinations about which direction things go in. And so we wanted to get that from you up front so that as we work to draft this language, we can draft it in that direction so that when we bring it back to you for consideration, it's those conversations have been had. So if you could go to the next slide, just an introductory slide we can skip over. So as I said, we want to go over the project high level, talk to you about where we are in the process, go through the enabling legislation, and then talk about some of those policy decisions. So the approach to this, as Doug alluded to, is that there's two essentially tiers of bills that we've identified. There are the tier 1 bills and the tier 2 bills. I'll go into what that means in just a moment. Rhode Island Housing is in the process of releasing some template language for these bills to address those. We are having, as part of this project, at least 3 3 workshops. We had one initial workshop with planning, a couple members of your planning board, with also a joint workshop with Coventry, with Lincoln and Cumberland as well, talked around the table, exchanged some ideas, which is, we think, one of the benefits of doing this with 2 other communities that are in the same situation as you are. Bringing this again to your local boards and commissions. We're going to start with we've already started with a regulatory review of going through your subdivision regulations and your zoning ordinance and picking out the sections where we know you're going to have to make changes based on the changes to the enabling legislation. We will begin and have begun to draft that regulatory language, which will eventually end up, as Doug said, at public hearings for adoption before the council and the planning board as well for adopting the subdivision regulations. This is a pretty general overview of the time frame that we're working in. The gray first half representing the tier 1 bills, which have to be addressed by January 1. And then the second portion of this being the tier 2 bills that we will continue, without hesitation after January to work on that language, basically allowing state law to override your local regulation because there is no consequence to it. There's no decision-making authority at the local level of determining, do we go in this direction or this direction? The state law is just going to change and has set the direction. So in the interest of trying to focus on the tier 1 bills, not using this time now to address the tier 2 bills because we know there's no consequence, buys us a little bit more time to focus on tier 1 where there is policy to discuss and decide on. So that's been the general approach to splitting these 2 pieces up. Next slide. So where we are right now, as I mentioned, is this is a screenshot of a table that we've created. We've identified the bill, the section of general law, what the change is, where that shows up in your local regulation or ordinance. This is going to be the guiding document that we use to go through each of the sections of your local regulatory framework that have to get addressed. And so there is a full table of this. We're in the process of finishing that table. The approach is to send that to your planning department, have them take a look at it. Hopefully, also involving your zoning, well, you are the zoning official. making sure that we didn't miss anything, making sure that we're covering all sections of the code. They know it best, so we want their feedback and input to make sure that we've collected everything that we need to, that's going to need to be amended. So what we do with it from there is then look at the actual bill language, see what's been changed, and use that information to then, if you could go to the next slide, take your local language and start to amend it to reflect those required changes. So where we're striking language in response to the state law, there's two different components of this. One is its existing language that needs to get updated, or it may be brand new language that doesn't exist in your regulatory. Because of the way the state law was changed, you now have to add a section or add a component that wasn't there before. As I mentioned, we've divided these into tier 1 and tier 2 bills. The tier 1 items have to do with pieces of your zoning. There's a bill that deals substantially with the Zoning Enabling Act. There are parts of that are tier 1, and then there are parts of that are tier 2. There's the subdivision bill, which changes the Subdivision Enabling Act. We consider a majority of that to be a tier 1 bill. And then there is a bill concerning adaptive reuse. This would be an example of something that you don't currently have in your regulatory framework, but now have to address. So that will be a new section that needs to get drafted and inserted into your regulatory framework. So that's an overview of the tier 1 component. And if you could go to the next slide, the tier 2, some of these bills are, so these were housing bills. They were presented as a package. So we are considering all of them, although there are some of these bills that will not necessarily result in changes locally. They may change process related to land use decision making, but it doesn't necessarily show up in your local regulation. So we have included them because we want the town to be aware of them, but it may not result in a direct change to your local regulation. So we can go through each of these at a pretty high level. I guess if there are questions, just, keep track, and we're happy to answer any questions that we can. There's a change to the notice requirements. This bill changes how notice is given for comprehensive plan amendments, zoning applications, and planning applications. This is one of those bills that we consider a tier 2 because there is no decision making for you to go one way or the other. It's changing, and we're going to follow it, and state law can take over. As part of the second portion of this, we will make sure that your local regulations are up to date and consistent with state law. But for that period of time in between, state law will just rule on this issue. There are 2 bills that have to do with the judicial proceedings. This is likely not something that needs to necessarily get reflected in your local regulations. It depends. One of the things that this bill does is it eliminates the State Housing Appeals Board. If you have a local reference to the State Housing Appeals Board, we want to clean that up and take it out because they won't exist any longer. But most likely there's not a whole lot in either of these bills that's going to directly require text amendments, but did want to make you aware that this bill is passed. There was a bill on the comprehensive plan implementation. Again, this is a tier 2 bill because there's likely nothing in your local regulations specifically that would need to get changed as a result of this, but it is something that the town should be aware of. It has to do with the implementation portion of your comprehensive plan. It speaks to, that you have 18 months to make your zoning consistent with your future land use map, And it also creates a circumstance where if your comprehensive plan is older than 12 years from the date of the plan's adoption, that you can no longer use that as grounds for denial of a land use decision. But you shouldn't have to worry about that, right?
Our current plan is certainly older than 12 years, but we have a new plan that we anticipate reaching local adoption within the next year.
Okay, so this bill takes effect in March. So if you haven't adopted it in March, by March, you could find yourself in that situation. There was a bill that amended the Low to Moderate Income Housing Act. This is a tier 2 bill. It has significant impacts, but the impacts are not really, there's nothing that we can do at the local level. It amends a couple of sections of the bill. Specifically of interest would be the density provisions. Previously, the Low to Moderate Income Housing Act did not have mandatory density provisions. It now does. It has density of basically a density floor that you cannot go any lower than. It amends a couple of the definitions related to affordable housing, which could potentially impact if you have a provision in your ordinance that limits for-profit developments to 1%. That could be impacted by this bill because they changed the way that that's essentially calculated. Those are the basic amendments from this bill. But as I said, it's a tier 2 bill because although we have to make your regulations consistent, there's no decision making for the community here. The town doesn't get to weigh in one way or the other on how they want this to get reflected in the local regulations. The other significant part about that bill is that it eliminates the master plan stage for a comprehensive permit. So it essentially reduces a comprehensive permit to preliminary and final, with final being administratively approved. So it's basically like one stage of review now. There was an amendment to the Inclusionary Zoning Act. That is not an issue for you to worry about because you don't have inclusionary zoning. If you were to decide you wanted to adopt inclusionary zoning, you would need to be consistent with the new provisions. But because you don't have it, there's no changes for us to make as a result of that bill. As I had previously mentioned, there was a bill related to adaptive reuse. We consider this to be a tier 1 bill because essentially what the bill did was that it made adaptive reuse, which is defined as the conversion of commercial buildings, including offices, schools, religious facilities, medical buildings, and malls, into residential units or mixed use developments as a permitted use. So regardless of the zoning district that the building is in, it is a permitted use. It has to have a minimum of 50% of the floor area dedicated to residential, and it cannot have any environmental land use restrictions against development. Those are basically the 2 criteria in which you need to meet in order to be considered an adaptive reuse project. The reason that we consider this to be a tier 1 bill is because we want to ensure that any adaptive reuse project that does come before the town has some kind of standards in order to be approved. So we're looking to either reflect what's already in your code, whether it's in the zoning ordinance or in the subdivision standards, concerning things like landscaping, lighting, signage, and other, issues around development. Because what we're looking at here is essentially residential units being allowed by right in some zoning districts that would not traditionally allow residential units. So we want to make sure that the residential units that are in these structures that get adaptively reused are appropriately buffered and, impacts are mitigated for the residents. And then conversely, if you're getting, you know, if you're putting additional residential units in, say, a school, which, you know, probably is in a residential zone to begin with, that the neighbors are also kind of buffered from a higher density of residential units within the district that, you know, was not contemplated previously before this was required. So that's why we would consider this a tier 1 bill. So there, as I mentioned, there was a bill that amended the Zoning Enabling Act. There are both tier 1 and tier 2 components to this bill. The tier 1 part of this is where they amended definitions. They amended the criteria to issue a dimensional variance, and the tier 2 part of this is the special use component. This bill essentially says that if you have special use permits in your use table, that those special use permits have to have specific and objective criteria on which a decision to issue the use or not issue the use is based. Those can be by category, but if you do not have those specific and objective criteria, that use is considered a permitted use by right. So you do not want to default to state law. Certainly you want the chance to categorize those uses, create the specific and objective criteria for them, so that when there is a request for a special use permit, it is not an automatic permitted use, that you have that set of specific and objective criteria that the decision-making authority can look to and can base their decision on. So I would say the majority of the changes are in the subdivision bill. And this really changes the process for how land use decisions are made at the local level. The major changes is that it changes a minor subdivision from 5 lots or less to 9 lots or less. It moves the process of a minor subdivision from the planning board or planning commission over to the administrative officer. It defines what a minor land use development is, and it defines what a major land use development is. Those used to be defined by the locality. The municipality got to decide what the thresholds were, but now there is a pretty specific definition of what minor and major are. Minor land use projects will go to your administrative officer. They will not go to the planning board. The act also broadens the authority, as I said, broadens the authority of the administrative officer. It strengthens the ability of your technical review committee to advise, and in some cases, limited cases, but in some cases to actually render decisions on applications. And this, I would say, is the bill where you have the most ability to make decisions about where things go and how things are processed. So, you know, for instance, and this act also defines what development plan review is pretty specifically. But for instance, in the development plan review, the act basically says that you get to decide who the permitting authority is. And that can be the administrative officer, it can be the technical review committee, or it can be the planning board. So that's why we're having this conversation with you up front, to talk to you about, you know, what direction do you want to go in for some of these decisions. And that way, when we go back to draft, we have clear direction from the town. Certainly not that you can't change your mind, but it helps us to draft the regulations without kind of those blank spaces of uncertainty. The other thing that this bill does is it mandates unified development review. So it takes away that kind of bouncing back and forth between planning and zoning when you have a land development application that is requesting either a variance or a special use permit. It now it now gives authority to the planning board to actually issue that variance or special use permit, whereas previously the applicant would have to leave planning, go to zoning, get that variance, get that special use permit, and then return to planning. And now the planning board or planning commission can actually issue, or has to be the issuing authority for variances and special use permits that are part of a land development application. There is a lot more detail in the handout that we gave you, so I'm certainly happy to answer questions after the fact, once you've had a chance to digest that, but that is the high level overview of the changes that are coming as a result of state law. So I do have the policy consideration slides up. We can bring up each of those. But in the handout that you also have some text underneath each of those questions. And this is where your planning department has kind of weighed in on these issues and given you some of what they feel might be the right direction to go. So really, I think, as Doug said, we want to kind of just truth these out a little bit, make sure that everyone is comfortable with the general direction that we plan to go in. And certainly if you have questions or concerns, we can talk through those and, make sure that everyone can kind of get on the same page with these issues before or while we start drafting. So I can go through each of them. We're talking about adaptive reuse first. It looks like we don't match up, so I can switch. Oh, okay, thank you. So as I had mentioned when we were talking about adaptive reuse, there is two ways to do this. We can rely on the existing standards in either your zoning ordinance or your subdivision regulations, or we can consider this, a unique circumstance where we want to, in the language that we draft, say these are the standards. So there, we can say, see the standards in the subdivision regulations for landscaping, lighting, signage, or we can say these are the standards, and we can create a new set of standards that addresses adaptive reuse. And I think your planning department has kind of said, let's take a look at.
If I could, just 1 second.
Yep.
Do we have the one that has the planning department's feedback in it, just so we can put it up on there? It's a separate presentation.
No, the handouts that we have aren't available on the slides.
Oh, okay.
We can make this document that does have some of the staff responses to the policy question available on the website for any interested parties after the fact. But for right now, the slides that we have are just the questions.
So just to bring everybody on the same page from these commissions and the council, the slide that she's now referring to is in the black and white packet that and titled adaptive reuse, with your comment, the planning department's comments underneath. Local policy considerations in the back.
So you're looking towards the rear of the packet, you'll start to see slides that have the header local policy considerations at the top. All of the board members and commission members have the same packet. So we're looking at the bill title adaptive reuse underneath the header local policy considerations.
Okay, thanks. I heard a lot of flipping, so I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. We'll give everyone a moment to get there before I continue. So as I mentioned, the planning department has weighed in here and has looked at your local sections and is suggesting that it probably makes sense to have specific standards just for adaptive reuse projects as opposed to using what you already have in your code. Okay, okay. So the second question is that the adaptive reuse bill sets a it sets 2 tiers of density. It essentially says that it's a floor of 15 dwelling units per acre if you meet certain criteria. So those criteria are that you provide 20% low to moderate income housing, that you have access to sewer and water. And I need to remind myself of the third one because I have a lot of this memorized, but not all of it. Thank you. Staying within the existing footprint, except for building code upgrade requirements. If somehow you do not meet one of those, it defaults you to a standard that essentially says it's the maximum density per minimum housing standards. It's going to be interesting to see how this gets implemented, but the general question for the town is how do you want to structure that? Because you can't go any lower than 15 dwelling units per acre. Do you have any desire to go higher than that? Do you want to build in, an ability to go higher, but set the floor, set the floor and the ceiling at 15 under certain circumstances, you can go above that. It really depends on, what direction the town wants to go in, how we would draft that language. We don't want to make any assumptions on your behalf. And then the third question is about the review process for adaptive reuse. I will say that I have my own questions about this because I think there is some language in there that's going to be a little bit problematic in terms of determining who does the reviewing. And I am in the process of a list of solicitor questions that will go to your solicitor and will go to other solicitors that we're working with, where I think there's some ambiguity or there's some inconsistencies, and we really need guidance and direction from your local solicitor, how that gets interpreted and what the regulation looks like. But beside that, the general question being, does development plan review take over for adaptive reuse projects, or do you assign that to either minor or major land development depending on the size?
Please.
So a minor land development is 9 or less units.
Well, yep.
So this couldn't be a minor land.
So
development.
I'll read you the definition of minor land development, and that should help clarify a little bit. I don't promise more than a little bit because some of it is not clear anyway. But a minor land development is defined as a project involving any of the following. It's 7,500 square feet of gross floor area of new commercial, manufacturing, or industrial development or less. It's an expansion of up to 50% of existing floor area or up to 10,000 square feet for commercial, manufacturing, or industrial structures. It is a mixed-use development consisting of up to 6 dwelling units and 2,500 square feet of commercial space or less. It is a multifamily residential or residential condominium development of 9 units or less. It is a change of use at the property where no extensive construction or improvements are being sought. An adaptive reuse project of up to 25,000 square feet of gross floor area located in a commercial zone where no extensive exterior construction of improvements is sought, or an adaptive reuse project located in a residential zone which results in less than 9 residential units. So there's a lot of things that could qualify as a minor land development, which some of them overlap with what's considered a development plan review development. So that's kind of where my question lies, is if it's overlapping, which one takes over? Because you can't do both anymore. You used to be able to do both, but you can't do both anymore. So as I said, can make it a little bit clearer, but not a lot clearer, unfortunately.
Counselor Ludwig, do you had a question?
So just in general, because I noticed, I see this a couple times, either set something new or use the existing, and then we add the language in. How would we do, it doesn't have to be specific to adaptive reuse, but when you say set something new, are we literally going to pull a policy out and put a big red line through it and start something new? Like, I guess I'm just trying to understand, when you say something new, you're going to write an entirely new policy and replace the entire old ordinance, I should say?
So on this one, we'll stay with adaptive reuse for now. You know, the code didn't anticipate something like this. And it makes sense for this to be handled in a new section of code within the zoning code that we would likely just title adaptive reuse.
Okay.
And then within that section, we'd say projects that qualify, these are the standards that you must meet. I think from staff's perspective, we're not interested in raising that density level. You know, 15 units per acre is very dense. That's the floor that's set by the state that they're allowed to be that dense. We're allowed to raise that floor. We're not interested in that. We're not allowed to lower that floor. But we do want to get the performance standards, which is things like, you know, how would we buffer these things? How would we address other internal operations and internal standards for how the site will operate? We want to get those things right. And there are cases where something could be, you know, more than 15 units per acre, but because it's a small site, it's actually less than 9 units. So it might be an adaptive reuse, but it still qualifies as an administrative review, meaning it doesn't go to the board. And those are the, you know, that's where we're going to have to really define the code and make sure it's clear what the process is for different projects of different scales.
So just because you mentioned before that the comp plan is kind of in parallel happening as well, our
Yep.
updated comp plan. So does any of that, I don't need like a super long answer. If it's yes or no, does it take into account any of these new laws, or are we doing this as priority and then going back to comp plan?
Yeah. And the two aren't necessarily, you know, intended to be, I'd put it to you this way, the comp plan didn't anticipate these new state laws, but the comp plan doesn't get into a level of detail where the comp plan says, by the way, you know, how you handle adaptive reuse shall be this way. The comp plan might like identify, hey, here's an interesting, you know, area of town where you might consider allowances for different uses. The code will provide the specificity for an applicant at the table. The comp plan is sort of a much broader direction. I don't know if that helps answer your question.
How about, you don't have to answer this, but how about capacity of our planning office to get the comp plan done by March?
It's going to be a lift.
If I may on that, and I don't want to get us too off to stay on track, but in a recent Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns meeting, the executive director and associate director let the board, the board know they've submitted a letter to Speaker Shikarchi's office saying, look, the January 1 and the March 1 are very aggressive timelines. And even those communities like Coventry that have their comp plan pretty much toward its end phase are scrambling to meet that. Think about those who haven't even started a new comp plan. So they put in a letter on behalf of the municipalities who are members of the league saying, we hope one of the first things that you pass for legislation when you come back into session in January is an extension. So we'll see how that goes, but just so you're aware, I mean, I made that point at the meeting as well. Like we have our act pretty farewell together in comparison with the other 38 cities and towns. So if we're worried, imagine those that haven't even started a new comp plan yet.
Yeah, thanks.
Director McLean, I don't know if you want to go to your board chairs to see if they have any comments on this particular policy.
Good point. Good point. And then raise your hand. Alex has got
We'll
a
just
mic.
go policy by policy.
If you have a question, feel free to shoot your hand up, and then we can always revisit if something comes up in your head after the fact.
On adaptive reuse.
Good.
Okay. Oh, Mr. Clunian.
Thank you. Thank you. Rick Looney with the planning, member of the planning board. Just a comment, really. I know everyone's kind of went, wow, 15 units per acre. There are a lot of school buildings that have been turned into condominiums, 1-bedroom studios. I know in Cranston, Westerly, and even maybe the Lockwood ones. They don't sit on a big footprint of maybe more than a couple of 3 acres. And to basically jump right out of the gun and say, wow, 15 seems awful aggressive, you know? So again, we just might want, before we just jump into these things, again, that's why we kind of have to look at exceptions, because that really helps the town meet its affordable housing goal in some cases. And it also brings in people that don't put kids in the schools and may lend itself to enhancing future commercial development in town.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from members of the board?
Hi, Glenn Anderson, Planning Commission. This adaptive reuse. We just had discussion of the comp plan. We just run into debate on the comp plan. Is that even going to be able to be used to vet this reuse or the new bills or the ordinances? Because we run into it. We're hyped on this comp plan, but it seems like it carries no weight on a lot of agenda items.
The idea is that there is a chance that we will have a fully locally adopted comp plan by March, but it's something that's hard to predict. We have to work through comments from the state, and then there's a local review process, which there might be time that's needed to digest that. The idea is that we would like to update it and get it adopted as quickly as we can. If we don't, and we're reviewing these projects, our current comp plan is still evergreen for reviewing projects. What state law has changed is that if there's a project that comes up, and you guys are aware when we have findings on a project and it's like, hey, does this meet the required findings of state law? If the only one where we find that we want to deny a project is the comprehensive plan, that this is not consistent with the comprehensive plan, and we're going to deny that on that one finding, state law is saying, well, your comp plan isn't evergreen for that denial ability. You have to have it updated by March to deny a project with just the comp plan in mind. Someone could bring a project forward and say, this doesn't meet zoning, this doesn't meet a lot of your standards. We still can deny that. So that's what the importance of having the comp plan adopted by March is. It gives us our ability to deny specifically on the comp plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I just brought it up because that's what everyone that the public comes before us, and even the planning commission members have used the comp plan in debate of certain projects, and it's quickly stifled that the ordinance trumps the comp plan. It just might come to fruition. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, the goal is we need to be working on both at the same time. Our goal for this code is that I think we are going to be in a world of pain if we're not ready by January 1. We do have obviously 3 more months to get the comp plan in order. I'd say we're still in a position of power, and the comp plan still holds quite a bit of authority after March, but it loses a piece of its authority, and we'd rather not lose that piece.
Any further comment from either board? Solicitor Angel?
Just want to reiterate some of the comments that I made. I think it was at the last council meeting. There's a lot of work here, obviously. My compliments to Director McLean. I've had discussions with Assistant Solicitor Igliozzi, who's allocated the planning and zoning. I feel very confident that we're going to be ready legislatively on the local level with respect to these changes. Even when a draft is turned around, there's a lot of work that we'll need to do internally to get it ready. But we're ramped up. We're ready for that, and I expect to meet these deadlines. March is a bit more of a challenge on the comp plan because so much of it is dependent upon the review of others and then the local stakeholders. But I think if we follow the lead of Director McLean, I think we can stay as close to on beam as possible with that. We are in a better position than many municipalities with respect to both of these processes. But that's cold comfort in light of the fact that this legislation is going to take effect, whether we like it or not, unless there's some forbearance that's granted by the General Assembly. So, you know, this is an important meeting because obviously, and I respect the time of the zoning board and the planning board for being here. There's a lot of information here to digest. I've talked in private land use projects with planners in other cities and towns and private planners who have said that this is the single largest imposition of a legislative change by the state legislature on local zoning codes that they ever remember in generations. So it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot to digest. So if you feel a little lost, like we all do, it's a world of difference. And we just got done with a case at Shab not that long ago. Shab goes away. It's different it will be different internally. The council may or may not be aware. I know that the planning commission is acutely aware that up until recently, I say we as a town did not really utilize the function of a technical review committee in the process of zoning and planning review. And that's something that I know that Director McLean believes in, and I know that Solicitor Igliozzi and I believe in quite a bit. Well, guess what? It's a big part of the changes that are coming, and there's some optionality within, you know, the general statutes to allow municipalities to use the TRC in a more decision-making capacity or in its advisory capacity. And that's really based on the recommendation of your planning director. And I really urge the council to, when it comes to that policy, that your decisions be informed by the wisdom of, you know, the director and your boards, because they really see what's happening in your community. I've had the good benefit of having sat with both planning and zoning, albeit not as often as Mr. Igliozzi does. And I can tell you, and I'm not going to speak for Mr. Igliozzi, but from what I've seen around the state with other zoning and planning boards, you're very fortunate that your zoning and planning boards have the sort of institutional knowledge of your town that they do, from top to bottom. It's really astonishing to sit through one of those meetings and hear them talk their way through a project and what they know about the area and uses and what works and what doesn't work. They're going to have input into this, and rightly so, I think. So it's just a thought. This is just the beginning. A lot of reading.
Councilmember Shockley.
So I don't know how deep we're supposed to go tonight. I do have a couple questions.
Adapt and on the adaptive reuse piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So the recent comment just made me think, so if we have a school on 10 acres, but it's one school and that's the footprint, does it have to be 150 units?
No, that is, they can have less units.
It just says 15 dwellings or units per acre.
Yeah. And that's essentially, you can have less units. There's no conflict with doing an adaptive reuse project that doesn't occupy that maximum density.
That's the minimum.
Well, you know, it's an interesting question because some buildings may not have that capacity. And there's those two categories. Now, we have reviewed this. Ashley is the expert on this, and this is still clear as mud after multiple reviews and reviewing it with the agencies that drafted it. There's two categories. The second category, which is the one where there's no affordable housing included, and the density is the maximum density allowed within like building code. Now, building code has certain codes that would say, you know, you can't create a housing unit that's 100 square feet, you know, and there's a handful of pieces that go into that, you know, determine the minimum size that a dwelling unit could actually be. And the second category says you can be as dense as that building code would allow you to be, but you can also be less dense. So there are categories of projects that will be not as dense as 15 units per acre. They're utilizing that second category, and they're going to only be as dense as they wish to be, with a cap that they can't be denser than something that would be basically break building code. Now, this is we've read this a number of times. I'd say Ashley's probably read this section of code 100 times, and it's still a little unclear.
And the truth is that I think some of these ways that we handle it will need to add clarity where we can. And the truth is that some of the state law in general, we're not going to know exactly where we stand until there's a little bit of case law on some of this, because of the code is ambiguous in certain ways, that it's going to take judicial bodies to review appealed cases to really establish some new case law. But there is that second category where essentially it's, you know, you can be as dense as building code allows. You can come in and be less dense than 15 units per acre. So it's not a mandatory, I want to do adaptive reuse, I have to be 15 units per acre. You can be less than that and be an adaptive reuse project. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. I see that here. Okay.
Any other comments, questions on the adaptive reuse piece? All right.
The next one in the handout is the Zoning Enabling Act.
Hang on. We'll have to flip.
2 pages forward instead.
Oh, okay.
There is a summary slide after each one that basically kind of summarizes the recommendations of the planning department. So that second page is the adaptive reuse summary. So some of these questions do relate to both tier 1 and tier 2 sections of the Zoning Enabling Act. There is a provision in here that says this is one that would be a tier 1. There's a provision in there that says that if a use is not categorized in the use table, that you have to provide a process for that individual who's looking for that specific use to either go to your zoning board or your zoning official to make a determination. Previously, the thinking was in some of the zoning ordinances was just state right out, if it's not in the use table, it's not permitted. That's not really the case any longer, because now you have to have a process by which somebody who doesn't find the specific use in the table can go to, like I said, either your zoning board or your zoning official, and they can request that there's a determination made if what they're requesting fits under one of the uses that does exist there. So the real question for you is, do you want your zoning board to handle those type of requests, or is that something that you feel can be handled administratively by the zoning official? The next one is about the special use permits that I mentioned, where you have to have these specific and objective criteria. I think this is another, question for legal interpretation, the way that it's worded. Do you have to do it by category? Can you do it for every special use permit? Do you necessarily even want to do it for every special use permit? If you do it by category, what are the categories? Do we have to go by what's in your use tables and how those are partitioned with like residential, commercial, industrial? Or is there an opportunity here to do it a little bit differently, and maybe we create categories of uses? It's, as Doug likes to say, as clear as mud in the actual enabling legislation. But I think the guidance from your planning department is, to use the categories that are in your use table, which is residential, agricultural, industrial, commercial, personal business, personal services, government, education, and institutional, and then recreation. I think there are benefits and drawbacks on both sides of however you decide to organize this. If you were to do specific and objective criteria for every special use, that would be just nuts. There would be, 100 pages in your zoning ordinance listing all of these specific and objective criteria. A lot of them would probably overlap, but it would be very clear what the specific and objective criteria are for every use. You categorize them. You, of course, shrink the amount of space that it takes to lay all of that out. But then do create a situation where I may have a commercial special use permit and a list of, I don't know, 18 specific and objective criteria because I'm covering every special use permit within that category. And then there is some obligation on the part of the town or the decision-making authority to say, you know, which ones apply and which ones don't apply to that specific use itself. So I think, as I said, there's kind of benefits and drawbacks on both sides of how you do this. That's definitely something to think about. There is a provision. Do you have a modification clause?
Yeah, we do have a modification clause, which means that in Coventry, if someone wishes to propose a variance, let's say you want to build a structure, there's a 10-foot setback, you shouldn't be closer than 10 feet to your property line, and you want to be 8 feet from your property line. You're allowed to send out, and this is a category called a modification, you're allowed to send out a mailing to the abutters. And you're allowed to say, I'm within 20% of the standard. I want to be 8 feet. The standard is 10. I'm pretty close. I'm within 20%. In Coventry, your standard is if you're within 25%, you're allowed to send out the mailing. If anyone objects, it gets kicked up to the zoning board as a standard review. If nobody objects, we're allowed to then approve that through an administrative decision after reflecting upon the comment period for the public notice, those that are noticed to comment on. So we currently have that in the law. The state is giving us the ability, or actually it's mandating.
It's mandating that you have that. It used to be an optional provision. Now it's mandating that you have that provision up to 15%, but you can go as high as 25. But Doug said you already go up to 25.
So the recommendation here is that we keep our current practice, that we have a modification practice up to 25%. In my limited time here, I have seen people take advantage of this. I have seen applications where someone wrote back and complained and said, I don't wish for this to happen. And then we elevated it and it went to the zoning board as a normal process. I've seen them where no one objected. And, maybe a few people called in, asked questions. They said, I don't object. And then it didn't need to go to the board. So my recommendation is that we keep that process. In my brief time, I haven't seen any issues with it, and I haven't heard any feedback that there are issues with how it works currently.
So the other portion of this that got modified, and this is another, question that your solicitor will see in the way that this language is worded, is that it says that the zoning official shall have the authority to grant a modification of 5% or less without notice. So that would be the process that Doug described. Anything that would be up to a 5% dimensional variance would not get mailed to abutters, would not have a comment period. It would just be reviewed administratively. They would look at it. They would consider the standards by which they're, supposed to issue a dimensional variance and either confirm or deny that they meet those standards. It remains to be seen if they have to do that or if they're just enabled to do that if they wanted to. So the way we're kind of approaching this without, answers to all of these questions right now is let's assume that you have the ability to do it or not do it. Would you want to do it? You may have to do it. We don't know the answer to that yet. And then, I don't think you and I had talked about whether or not you permit the alteration of non-conforming development that was established by variance, or if you have to return to. So that may be something we need to look at to see if that's enabled already or not.
I want to say that our code says that if there's a nonconformity established via variance, to modify that does take another trip to the zoning board.
So the change in the law basically says you don't have to go back. You can basically enable that to happen without having to go back. So we'll look at that and more closely to make a determination there. And I think that's all of them for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's any discussion.
Yeah, I
about
was just
any of
gonna
those.
open it up to the council or board members. Anything on zoning enabling act considerations? Oh, Council Ludwig, sorry, I didn't see you. Kim's got a big water bottle.
So I know this isn't a 1-for-1. Just bear with me for a second. So we've gotten in some trouble with special use permits versus needing them versus not needing them in the past. And so I just want to make sure that we keep, I know John's not here tonight. I just want to keep the District 1 residents on our mind to make sure that we don't have another type of turbine issue that skips some sort of process that we think it would realistically should go through. And then someone signs off on the side of their desk to, a 300-foot structure. I just want to know how to make sure that doesn't happen again, or how do we account for some of those items, like in the categories you were talking about on the next big, I don't know what the next big energy maker is, but I mean, we learned our lesson on what not to do for turbines. Now we have a specific ordinance, but I just don't want to be behind the 8 ball when we have these ordinances in our hands and we're thinking of future things. How do we make sure that that doesn't happen again?
So my understanding is you're asking if there are certain uses that are, perhaps allowed by right that we should trigger a special use permit. And that's a good question. But I think for the purposes of right now, we're thinking through what we already have that requires a special use permit needs a new process. I think that the question you have is valid, but that might be something that I would suggest could be broader than the scope that's in front of us, which is, hey, we think we want to be prepared for X. Obviously, wind energy, solar energy are examples of things that have come about in the last 10 years that we didn't anticipate 10 years ago. And, we can do our best to get ahead of that as much as we can. I think this project didn't anticipate, let's get ahead of that right now. I'm always an open door. So, if there's a desire to want to get ahead of something, then I'm all on board with it. But I think this process is about cleaning up what we have right now and making sure that, for example, a special use permit that's required right now, that we can send it to the zoning board and we can defend the decisions.
So
on
I
it.
understand what you're saying. Let's keep it to the scope. Can I at least ask that we, before we make decisions or before things get stamped, is this another turbine situation? So,
But you are right, because when we did discuss this 2 years ago and we were examining the issue at large, it was apparent even from our legal counsel then that our codes and ordinances were not equipped to catch the issues with
it just went through.
energy.
Yeah,
Yes.
it just went through. And we're talking some of the things you mentioned, like, oh, if it's under 5%, like I'll just sign it off on my desk. Oh, if it's under 25%, I just have to send a postal note out. They're making it so easy to get these things through. I don't want another turbine situation getting through because we didn't think about that when we were doing this. So that I just want to keep that in the back of our minds when we're doing this, so we don't create the next issue.
That's fair. And I think it's important to recognize, we're talking about two types of requests, 2 types of applications, a special use permit and then dimensional variances. That buffer, that wiggle room on a 25%, that's only for variances, which are quantifiable on a numeric scale. A special use permit is sort of categorical. There's no ability for something that triggers a special use permit to have their ask reduced from less than a special use permit through this relief. So essentially it's a dimensional variance is, you're going to be in your setback or the building's going to be a little larger. And that's fair that, hey, if that building can be larger, should we allow someone to make it larger by a potential mail out or not? And that's a policy question that I think we're here to get your feedback on now.
But I think that the thing you just mentioned is what I saw from the other pages, at least certified mail is not even going to be needed anymore. You're just going to have to
Correct.
send it first class.
First
So
class.
again, we're like, I get it. I get what they're trying to do.
Yep.
They want They want a housing boom. They want to build, build, build. They want to get it through, make it easier. And for some residents, maybe that will make a process easier for them. They want more affordable housing. I get it. I get it. But I'm just going to say this 3 times to keep it all in our minds. Turbine, turbine, turbine. I just want to make sure that we don't create a situation by going through this and think, oh, we're going to make it easier for this and this to happen. And then turbine slips through. So all I'm asking is to just keep that in mind.
You got it.
Thank you.
Solicitor Angel.
I think that's a great point. I mean, one of the things that I've talked to Director McLean about and Mr. Igliozzi is as we go through this, I know that, Ms. Sweet has addressed her remarks in tiers, right? There's certain tier 1 things that need to get done right away. And then there's tier 2 and so forth. But as we work our way through the code, and some problems that we've encountered in my brief tenure here, I'm stretching the bandwidth, I know, of our internal work group, but I want to tag those areas where there are potential loopholes with an eye towards developing our own tier of urgency with respect to addressing these, because for those very reasons, these massive changes, and they are massive changes in both process and substance, are addressing themselves directly toward making affordable housing easier to develop statewide, plain and simple. But there will be unscrupulous developers. There will be developers who lack the financial backing that we would like to see. For those very reasons, we've had internal discussions about tightening other sections of our code with respect to financial responsibility for developers and things of that nature. Those are coming quickly. But to some of the points that have been raised here, what's the next big money maker for some developer for which there may be some loophole in our code? We're looking at that. And certainly we're not experts at that. I mean, as lawyers, we know what we see out there, but your planners know. And among this group, I'd say we have access to just about every major planner in the state who's thinking about these things. And by the way, your planner and I'll pick on Ed for a minute, your planner in East Providence, he also has a private practice where he consults for developers too. Lots of planners do that. So they know what they're seeing. They know what the trends are. We'll be looking to inform ourselves and inform you of that as we move along. Really important.
Any board commission members on Zoning Enabling Act?
A lot of information.
Sure. Totally understandable. Mr. McLean, I just want to be cognizant of time. The council's got a full agenda after this. Is it fair to give another 15 minutes or so to wrap up?
It's at your pleasure. So
Okay, I think we have one more local policy consideration? Land development and subdivision?
Yep, and it's probably the biggest one.
Okay. With that said,
Just go too forward.
black and white. The final three pages.
Like, when do we
And
get to
for
ours?
time efficiency, if a council person, a board member has anything that they didn't quite get a chance to comment on, you can email me. If you wish to say, hey, there was a policy consideration here I wasn't quite sure about, feel free to email me because we're trying to be respectful of time here. But there's some of these can be deep dives.
Yeah, I'm seeing information overload on a lot of faces right now, so.
Understood.
So as Doug said, the last one we have is the Land Development and Subdivision Act changes, which unfortunately are the most impactful and largest in volume. As we talked about, the bill expands the ability of the administrative officer. It expands the authority of the administrative officer. It also pluralized administrative officer and allows you to make more than one. We're certainly recommending, considering the shift of decision-making authority that's moving from your planning board over to your administrative officer, that it's probably a good idea to have a second person that's also designated. Because if your AO goes on vacation and somebody files an application the day after they leave, they may only have a 15-day time clock in order to certify an application and then 25 days to make a decision. If you default on that time clock, you get an automatic approval, and you do not want that to happen. So you should probably have a second person that can fill that role in the case of a vacation, or, God forbid, a health issue or whatever that takes them away from the office. You want someone to be able to fill in there. I think the suggestion that was given, because you are fortunate and have more than one person in your planning department, that you could have your principal planner as a designee, as the second administrative officer to fill that role. We want to make sure that we make that clear in your regulations. So there was a period of time where we thought development plan review was optional, and then realized that they did not write it correctly. It was intended to be optional, but they struck the may from the Zoning Enabling Act and wrote shall, and left the Subdivision Enabling Act with a may. The conservative, I think, reading of that is that they intentionally struck the word may and wrote the word shall, and it's not optional. It also is somewhat internally inconsistent and quite difficult at this point to figure out just how you're going to implement it. I attempted a flow chart on it, and it was messy looking. It didn't flow well. No. Our recommendation right now, which has been kind of supported by the individual that drafted the language, because it's not clear, and you have to have it. It's probably the best thing to do right now is there's two components to development plan review: administrative and formal. Right now, let's use the most innocuous kind of types of projects that we can think of, dedicate those to development plan review, see what the General Assembly does, and if they go back in and fix it. I think if they're gonna make fixes, this will be fixes, and they'll change it back to a may, and hopefully they'll clean up the internal inconsistencies. But so far, that's kind of where we're pointing people in that direction right now, because you have to have it for something.
Yeah. And for my planning commission members, you guys are familiar with what a DPR application is. It's any kind of commercial development that's getting replaced with what's now going to be called a minor land development. DPR is serving a different role, and we need to ascribe it a role. We need to keep it on the books, but it generally, anything that's a significant project, any construction, it's going to get categorized as a minor land development or a major. If it's a certain size, it gets a major. You guys will see majors. Minors will be administratively reviewed. The idea is if we have to keep DPR on the books, we're going to keep it for something that isn't a construction project, and it's a change of use. A building's being used for one thing, they want to use it for another. We have a process to make sure that they have enough parking. Is the site adequate for that? That's what we will use DPR for. And that's our general approach. I wanted to address the board because they may be asking what happens to DPR. Really, it is largely not, you're not going to see a DPR project. You'll see them as land development projects.
So as I mentioned, it does give some authority to your technical review committee. One of the instances, and again, this relates to DPR, so it's kind of not completely relevant, but it does allow the technical review committee to be the decision-making authority on formal development plan review applications. It can also be the planning board. So that's a consideration, is where you want that authority to go. And I think the recommendation from your planning department is that, the it would go to the planning commission, with the planning director, the planning commission could probably say, they could delegate the authority.
Councilmember
Um,
Shockley.
Thank you. Just so I'm clear, who makes up the technical review committee?
Good question. We don't have one yet.
Great.
We have old policy on this. It's something that I think was attempted a number of years ago. A technical review committee is essentially like an advisory group. It's generally made up of your planning staff, your town engineer, your town DPW director. You might want to have fire there. Fire is a little unique in Coventry. A lot of technical review.
So it's a
committees-
professional.
It
board.
is, but it is largely staffed, but they can also occupy, planning commission member can occupy a spot. And that is something that happens in a lot of TRCs across the state.
But it does seem that for the most part, we don't have to put together, like I said, another board.
No.
We have staff and possibly someone
Correct.
on a current commission.
Yeah,
Okay.
this would not be a need to appoint a new group. It would likely be code that designates the town engineer or designee, the DPW director or designee, and they're positions that are filled by position title, not by an appointment.
To your point, Councilwoman Shockley, the TRC is something that I may have alluded to without defining it before. In many other municipalities, they utilize the TRC extensively in the land use and development process so that you're bringing in those different constituencies of expertise. It's not been used here. What I saw when I first came here, it was a bit alarming to me, is that information was being distilled by one individual in planning and presented to the planning board as gospel truth. And they did not have the benefit of the individual input of each of those disciplines. Town engineer, for example, right? So.
The thinking behind the technical review committee really is that we're taking development projects that used to happen in the public realm. They used to happen before the planning commission. There would be the ability to have a conversation around the table. People would bring kind of institutional knowledge. You might get, somebody from the audience who would raise an issue that somebody hadn't thought of. The only real way to fill that hole that's been created is to use your technical review committee to have that conversation, to hold that meeting. I think there's an opportunity to make a commercial building that previously happened in the public realm. They can now lean on those technical experts to provide them with guidance and a recommendation that then the administrative officer can incorporate into their decision-making, which really kind of helps to shoulder the burden that's been placed on the administrative officer. Because the honest truth here is ways to use your technical review committee to fill that gap, shoulder some of that burden, and support your administrative officer because they're going to need it.
Vice President LeBlanc.
I'm definitely a huge fan of using the technical review committee. And going back to Councilwoman Ludwig's comments on changing from certified mail to first class, I'm actually against that completely. Going back to turbines. All I hear from those residents is that they never got proper notification. So not only am I in favor of this technical review committee being in public session so that people can come and share comments, I also think that we as a town should try to come up with a policy for certified mail for larger projects, even though it's not required by state law, but we still send it out to these people to say that, hey, this project is going on. There's going to be a meeting this day. Please come and speak if you're against it or for it, whatever it may be. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if that's legal, but that would be my preference.
Well, I can't speak to it being legal because I'm not a lawyer on that, but the law says that what's required is certified. Is first class.
Yeah, it's going to be first class now, not
First
certified.
class. I don't think you can make the developer do it. But
I'm not
maybe-
saying that. I'm just saying as a town, we
maybe
notify
you
these
can-
people.
Maybe you can do it as the town.
Yeah.
Because when the solar array is going on the landfill 2 years ago, we had asked for certified mail to be sent to abutters. It wasn't even required, but just to have a meeting with them and do a glare study. But we only knew it was happening because the town council needed to approve the contract. That we wouldn't have been able to trigger that kind of local attention if that didn't come before us.
Yeah, there is definitely an unfortunate shift of like decision-making authority now happening outside of that public realm where it used to happen.
Councilmember Shockley.
Just an overarching theme, I feel, is the state is trying to loosen everything as far as this goes. And I am not an expert on planning and zoning, but it does seem as if as a town, we should try to keep as many restrictions as possible in place. Where if the state, the state might at some point look at what they've done and pull back, depending on who our leadership is at any point in time. And I don't want to have gone so far based on this, that now we have to let people do more than possibly some other cities or towns have to let people do. So it just seems that whenever the state decides to go this far, as a town, we should just do our best to keep some control over the development that happens here.
100% agree with that. And that's kind of an eye that we're looking at this with, which is to maintain as much local control as we can within the framework that we've been given. And I think a TRC is something that would benefit this town regardless. It would benefit the town today. We're really going to lean on that because if there's a project that is somewhat aggressive, it may not have developed all of the information quite properly, and we need to be in a position to deny that. We need a strong, robust record of the issues. We need to have transparency in the process, and we need to be able to have defendable decisions. So, I mean, we're going to use the TRC to be transparent. We will make them public. We will make sure that people are aware of them. The agendas that, are created, projects that are flowing through the TRC, we're going to do our best to make sure that everyone is aware of that. Because the idea is that if people have comments, we still want to receive them. And we still want to acknowledge them, and we want to be able to address the details of projects at a high level. So, that's why that's one of our, when you're talking about how do we kind of play defense a bit, TRC is a place where we're going to be doing that.
If I can, that is exactly, and I apologize if I didn't make this clear, but that's exactly the lens that I've talked with the director about, and the assistant solicitor about, is maintaining as much local control over development and as much transparency as possible, because the state government is loosening the process for sure, but maintaining local control certainly is of paramount importance to this group, I know, and to the planning director. So yeah, that's all I have to say. That's the lens we're looking at it through.
I just want to be cognizant of time, so if we can reserve any additional questions or thoughts till they finish these slides. We're almost coming up on 2 hours, and we have a whole agenda. So just for everybody, if we can just move through the rest of these. Thanks.
So I think we can kind of skip the next two, given the conversation that we've had. We've kind of set the bar for, I think, where we're going to use DPR for now, until they do a better job. And I think I've heard loud and clear that we're not going to raise these minimum thresholds to anything higher than they need to be at this time. We talked about the technical review committee. Part of this will be that we have to enable that technical review committee in your local regulations. I think there is a question for your solicitor about where that lives. It used to live solely within the planning board's discretion. It was in state law that the planning board appointed it. They intentionally struck the words planning board and inserted the word municipality, which probably means the town council. So we'll have to do a little bit of dancing back and forth between what we can enable in your zoning and then what we can send over to the planning regulations and let them do the rest of. We talked about who would sit on that committee. It's pretty standard. The one thing that they did do in the enabling legislation was they expanded the technical review committee. You can appoint members of the public if you'd like to. That was never part of the technical review committee before. There is a provision in there that the administrative officer is permitted to provide waivers from the regulations. Currently, the administrative officer doesn't really have the authority to do that. It's your planning board that, or planning commission that has the authority. But they have transferred that authority to the administrative officer because of the number of applications that are now going to stay with your administrative officer. If you want to give your administrative officer the authority to grant waivers, you have to specify what those waivers are. We've talked about things like curbing, sidewalks, street trees, pretty innocuous things that don't always apply to every application. It might be something that you want to consider. Minor subdivisions and land development projects, you have the ability to designate that to either the technical review committee or the administrative officer. I think you have a current practice right now where the administrative officer is often taking final applications. So it may be that we can write a provision in there that as a standard practice, the administrative officer does that with the ability to send it to the technical review committee if they feel like there is an issue that needs larger attention. It cannot go back to the planning commission. And then the last question has to do with minor and major changes. It looks like you already have a definition of what constitutes a minor change and what constitutes a major change. We just want to clarify that you want to keep that as is. Is there any need to alter those definitions in any way? And that is the end of our set of questions for you.
Any comments from the two boards we have here today? So, Mr. McLean, I would say your call to action here is your phone line and door is open as they digest this information.
Yes, please. I would just ask that if you have thoughts, comments on this, if you can reach out to us sooner than later. We're looking to develop a final product of the zoning language we're probably talking about like October 17th or 18th. So, I mean, we're right there. I would hate for us to draft something and then get a comment from someone like on October 15th of let's head a different direction. So if you're able to give me comments, questions sooner than later, I'm going to work directly with Ashley in terms of whether that changes the direction. We'll do our best to take it all into account and to change the direction the best that we can.
Might behoove us to send a note to all the individuals here and just say, final call, if you haven't had a chance to submit, or get in touch with you.
Yeah.
Now's the time.
I'd say we're at the warning track now. I would ask that.
Well, depends what ballpark you're in.
Yeah,
Is it a
exactly.
wide horn?
Yeah. I would say if everyone could get me, something, if you want to send me an email, that makes it really clear and easy. Doug, I have concerns with the direction we may be headed on the X policy within a week of today. I know that's aggressive, but we're also working under an aggressive time
So
frame.
October 3rd.
If you can. If you have questions, feel free to call. If you want to send an email with more of an exploratory email, feel free to send that.
Okay. All right. Director, do you want to close your two boards meetings, adjourn them?
Yes, that's wise. Alex has got the mic. We'll do it on mic just so everyone can hear it on Zoom.
Thank you. Like to make a motion to close the special joint planning and committee meeting tonight.
To a vote. I think we do need a vote on that. Yeah, please. You can just make an oral vote.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Bob Crow, Chairman of Zoning. At this time here, I'd like to have a motion on the floor to adjourn. Seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Nays? Ayes have it.
Thank you very much to the participation by all the boards. Again, open door. Feel free to reach out with questions, and we look forward to October 24th. We will have an opportunity to have again a broad discussion, and these three groups will all be back together in this room in a similar format, and we won't need a vote on October 4th, but we will have language in hand at that point.
Okay.
I'm sorry, October 24th.
Yep. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And thank you to the boards here. I'm just let's do a 5-minute bio break. And if the manager can grab the finance director, we can start the rest of our meeting. Thanks. Joanne, you good?
This week. Getting done this week, Station Street. This week.
Oh, yeah?
Station Street.
That guy. The one that had this late when it rained. I feel bad for him. They are trying to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't, shall I introduce you to Ron Driscoll? Every day, because you know what happens? When those things don't drain in the winter and they freeze, then it rains on top of them. Yep. That's what the Binglewood issue is. Yep. All right, I'm gonna get started. Reconvening, moving on to licenses. Item A, new mobile food establishment license, Newport Creamery Incorporated. Yearly license. This is on page 60 and 61 of our packets. Do I hear a motion to approve the license?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Vice President LeBlanc, second by Councilmember Shockley. Discussion. Manager Parrillo, any comments on this license? Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Ludwig,
Yes.
Councilmember Shockley,
Yes.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Yes.
President Lima,
Yes.
4 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, motion passes.
Moving on to report of the town manager, update on meeting with Auditor General, Manager Parrillo.
Thank you. Yes, we had our monthly Zoom meeting on Friday with the Auditor General. The main point of discussion was the letter that he received from Chris DeVerna from the school department regarding their 22 deficit of $700,000. That was the majority of the meeting. It kind of, the letter that I sent out to everyone, it kind of explains how they got there regarding their deficits in salary and transportation and tuition and so forth. The thing that was kind of not really clarified, because it really wasn't discussed with us prior to it happening, was how they plan on addressing that shortfall. So in the letter, he puts in there that the council will provide the school department $140,000 over the next 5 years to cover that $700,000. So the Auditor General asked me if I was on board with that, and I advised him that we have not discussed it. We have not discussed it as a council, and that I could not say that that's definitely going to happen, that we're going to have that additional funding to cover that. In the letter, as you saw, it also talked about the 4% increase that they're going to be asking for. And that too was a point of contention, not a contention, point of discussion. And I told them again that the council has not had time to sit down and decide what next year's budget is going to look like as of yet. So that was the letter. The AG is very concerned with the growing deficits in the school department over the last 2 years. He made a point of saying that. So we have another meeting in a month to move forward again. The audit, the 22 audit should be done end of November, beginning of December. 23 audit should be done in February. That's from CLA. That's the goal next year, February of 24. That's the time frame that they told us. Obviously things can change, but as of right now, that's what they're shooting for. End of November, beginning of December, and then February of 24. That's where they're at. So that's kind of the update.
Councilmember Shockley.
Have we gotten them everything that they need from us in order to meet that February goal? Is it really just what their abilities are based on other work?
Want to comment on that, Bob?
I just know in the past, it's been that we haven't gotten them what they need. in many circumstances. So this year, I just want to know if who,
Yeah, so at this point, no, they don't have everything. We're working on that. We informed that they should have everything, obviously relative to the 22 audit within the next couple of weeks, so by October 1st. And then by end of November, our anticipation is that they'll have everything for the 23 audit. And based on that, that's their opening time schedule of when they think they can have everything completed.
I think October 1st is in like 5 days.
End of the month. We're close. We're close.
Just want to mention, you said a couple weeks, October 1st.
Another month. Okay.
Are these like audited numbers?
Counselor Ludwig.
So we had a similar situation, I think it was like 2 years ago, where, okay, we identify there's a deficit. We tried to invite the school committee in, the superintendent in. I was harshly criticized for even mentioning this at a town council meeting that we invited them to, that they were sitting in the front row to, but didn't want to participate in. So how can we just not repeat 2 years ago? Because nothing got resolved and there was just so much tension. So it sounds like you're meeting monthly. Do we reach out and say, you know, could we have a joint session? Could we, what do we do?
So we're meeting monthly right now with the Auditor General and the school side. We have not begun our monthly meetings with just the school and the town yet. Right now, it's this, these meetings include the Auditor General, town and school. So we haven't invited them to a council meeting to discuss this document or what it contains as of yet. I'm hoping the relationship is at a point where they will come in and they will take part.
Monthly basis. So let's make sure that we're having those conversations, and when things are put in front of the Auditor General and everybody on that phone call is aware of the direction.
All right. So good evening. So the first report you have is the budget actual fiscal year 6/30/2023 as of this date. As I know right on the top, and we talk about it, I know Vice President doesn't like to hear it, but it is still a work in progress. But at this point, and it's an updated report from what was originally sent you. Hopefully you all saw that yesterday, because in putting together some of the notes, we noticed a significant variance. So the deficit at this point, as of June 30, 2023, for the year that ended, approximately $230,000. I'll just give some of the highlights, but that's a result of revenue shortfall of approximately $874,000. And expenditures, we actually had a favorable variance where our expenditures were under budget by approximately $645,000. And you'd see some of the variances there are again, the bullets. You know, Treasurer's Department, there was excess revenue, a favorable variance of $410,000. A significant portion of that was an increase in the fair market value of our equities. As we previously discussed, there was some approximately $5 million invested in equities. Well, those equities, the market value increased during the fiscal year. But as of June 30th, 2023, we liquidated all of those equity holdings, and now we're strictly in U.S. Treasuries with the tax dollars or the general fund operating dollars. State aid was approximately $2 million more than budgeted as a result of motor vehicle phase out. But then you'll see the tax assessor's office was approximately $3.2 million less than anticipated. So again, that was just, in my opinion, a variance in how the budget was passed in the previous year. They were still under the tax assessor's line, a budget for motor vehicles, wherein we didn't bill for motor vehicles. Yeah.
Do you mind?
Can she ask?
Sure.
So the tax assessor's office with 3.28 million less than anticipated. What percentage is that for them of, so that's uncollected taxes?
It's not uncollected taxes. It's really just when that budget was put together, they budgeted a line item for motor vehicles.
Okay.
And then when the state passed and said you can't bill for motor vehicles, it rolled up into the money coming directly from the state. So it's really not an.
I got you.
collection.
No, I noticed that in the fall budget,
Yeah.
but okay.
It's just again, my opinion, how it was budgeted, it really should have all been budgeted as state aid for the motor vehicle phase out. Correct. And then on the expenditure side, again, you'll see various bullets there, but really one of the most significant, the police department. Police department was under budget by approximately 825,000. Although again, I think there's an additional accrual that we're gonna need to record, but I need to go back and see how it was recorded as of June of 22 and make sure we're comparing apples to apples and staying consistent, but that could be approximately 170,000. So again, fiscal 23, we're looking at this point, a deficit of 230,000. That could still increase before the audit's completed. And as we're reconciling, we're getting down to the last few accounts, but as we're going through those, that's going to impact that number. And then you had the fiscal 24 year to date, which again, we're only 60 days into the new year. But, you know,
Yes, Council Ludwig.
So, Mr. Civetti, can you just go back to the, I think it's revenue shortfall,
Mhm.
C, Treasurer Department, favorable variance of 410, but it's in the revenue shortfall category. So I just want to make sure I understand. This was an earnings.
correct. That shortfall is a net of, we had various line items where there was a shortfall, but that was offset by some revenue line items that exceeded budget expectations. So that was actual favorable variance, which helped offset some of the negative variances or the shortfalls on other line items.
I mean, this is almost $500,000. So was this plan to sell these? Can you give us a little background? What securities were sold? Where did it come from? Did we plan to sell them?
So again,
Who's-
there
who's
was,
managing this?
those investment securities were being managed by GYL Financial Advisors. They held that Fidelity. When I came on board, I thought they were sitting in a money market account. And then we found out that they were actually invested in equities. So the previous administration or the finance director had told the investment advisors that they wanted a investment policy that was 80% invested in equities and 20% in treasuries. But, you know, which that plan, I would say, is usually acceptable for a pension plan or something of long-term nature, but not for your current operating funds. So as of from the high point through June of 22, there was actually a decline in the market value. So there was a loss on those investments. Had they been sold at June of 22, there was a loss on those investments of about 1.2 to 1.5 million. Off the top of my head, I can't give you an exact figure. During fiscal 23, because the market had increased, we recovered some of that loss. So I believe at the end of 23, once those assets investments were sold, there was a net loss of about $900,000 from the peak of what those investments were at.
Okay, I'm now slightly confused because you've said since the value, since they were bought, since they were sold. What is the, when this says favorable variance of 410K, what does the 410K represent on here? Just
Again, from a financial statement standpoint, we're required to report the investments or the cash, CDs, et cetera, at market value.
right?
So at June of 22, we had to recognize in the financial statements a decrease in market value of roughly, again, 1.2 to 1.5 million. During fiscal 23, that turned around. So
did
now we had a
we
market
actually,
increase.
so we instructed
We
the
instructed
advisor
them
to sell them,
to sell them in June.
change the portfolio.
Correct.
What percentage, or just generally, are we at approximately?
Right now, we're 100% investment in treasuries,
100%.
fully guaranteed by the full faith of the government. And
So by some miracle somewhere, we made the 410K in essence by selling in June.
correct.
Okay, so I'm in finance and as a FYI, I'm also at Fidelity. We didn't lose 1.2. So that's why I'm just trying to,
Again, if
I'm trying to
you gotta look
understand.
at a snapshot, so at a specific point in time, because our fiscal year ends on June 30th, that's always a snapshot we look at. And when we look at what the investments were at, again, their peak, which may have been June of 21, July of 21. At that point, the investment strategy actually wasn't even 80-20. I forget specifically what they said, but it was more like 60-40 possibly. At that point, the investment advisors were advised or asked to increase it to an 80-20. Well, they did the 80-20 change at the worst possible time, because that's when the stock market started to crash or decline
Don't say
significantly.
crash, sir.
Decline significantly.
Okay, thank you.
So again, we recovered 400,000, but as we talked, meeting with the town solicitor, town manager, it was my opinion, we shouldn't be in equities, at least not with towns' tax dollars. So we made not operating dollars. I believe it's a violation of state law, although state law doesn't seem to specifically dictate how municipalities should invest the money. But when we brought it to
Solicitor
the
Angel.
attention,
But my opinion is violative of federal law, so I don't really care what the state law says. I mean, we talked about that. We brought that before the council. I mean, it's just not best practices, financial management. You don't invest operating dollars in long-term equities. You just don't. It's cash and cash equivalents or short-term government back. So that's where he's headed now.
yeah, so unfortunately, the decision was made to obviously liquidate. Had we held, could they be higher? They could be higher, they could be lower. I haven't looked at those
I don't
investments.
care
so,
about that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Kind of continuing on with Councilmember Ludwig's comments. She asked about the mix of investments. I believe it was maybe 2-3 months ago, we talked about investment policy. Do you have a formal investment policy that you're currently abiding by?
Right now, we have a draft red line policy that we're finalizing. We met with the investment advisors about a week ago or 2 weeks ago. They're finalizing a draft of that policy. That's being
And is it gonna
reviewed
come
by
in
the
front of the council?
solicitor. Then it's going to come to the council
Okay.
for review.
Thank you.
One of the things that we need to do as a group, there's an investment policy for each of the portfolios because each is different. But there's really no precatory language within the financial ordinances in town, and that needs to happen. And that's what we're working with them on to make sure that everything comes together appropriately.
Any further discussion on FY23? Council Ludwig.
And I just want to make clarification. I have no connection. I have no connection to what you're talking about before in terms of the roll up to the investment advisor and funds held at Fidelity. I can't see it, touch it. I don't know what that is. So I just want to be clear to the public. I don't have anything to do with that. So thank you.
If I can just add some clarity to that, they're just a fiduciary. So that's correct. The actual broker advisor is GYL in Hartford.
All right, FY24.
So again, FY24, we're only 2 months in. So if you look at the various expenditure line items, you would expect to see that we still have available budgets of about 83%, 84%. You're going to see some line items on the expenditure side where are 100% fully spent. And that's obviously just because of the timing of transactions such as workers' comp insurance, regular property insurance, that is paid in full by August. So we've incurred the full year's cost. Again, just looking at the various line items, I think from a revenue standpoint, we're doing well right now, but I just caution you that you can't really just take the revenue we have year to date and say, multiply that by six. That's where we're going to finish because you have various, planning fees, licenses, all that. We may be more heavily involved or receiving those fees in the summer months versus winter. So, but a couple items that, do jump out. We're just talking about revenue from the treasurers. I would anticipate that we're going to receive more revenue than budgeted for investment income this year. We've been working with our various financial institutions, trying to negotiate with each of them to get our interest rates higher and higher. So currently we have several CDs that we're in short term, some, up to 4 months, some just 30 days. as well as we've rolled into some ICS accounts, which are insured cash sweeps, where the money sweeps in and out every day. And we're averaging anywhere from 4.5% to 5.5% on those. So we're trying to maximize the investment rate of return. I think our budget was around 300,000. We'll probably come in closer to 500,000 or 600,000, hopefully, if the interest rates can, stay where they're currently at. So again, the banks have worked with us. I have changed, just in the past couple of days, we withdrew money out of Webster Bank. We took out about 1.2 million and moved it to another bank. Webster wasn't providing any interest on that money. They haven't been responsive, so I moved the money to now we're getting 5% interest on it. Recreation Department, you'll see that the revenue looks like it's possibly a little less than anticipated, but again, there's still a significant transaction that we have to record where most of the fees for summer camp and summer programs was received in the spring. So we need to do an entry to pull that out of last year, pushing into the current fiscal year. But likewise, we need to go back to spring of 22 and move that revenue into fiscal 23, which if it's usually pretty much equal, it shouldn't impact the 23 results we looked at. But again, it's a restatement and just looking at the timing of where we recognize that revenue. Just a couple notes on the human resources. So if you look at the school SRP pension contribution, the actually determined contributions estimated to be 643,000. We budgeted 721,000. So right now I'm actually only contributing 1/12 to the 643 on a monthly basis. But depending where we are at the end of the year, we can certainly determine should we contribute the additional amount. Opposite impact below where the municipal pension, when we got the final numbers, that contribution's at roughly 1.2 million. We're contributing 1,178,000. So we're a little short there. And Treasurer's Department, there's some the grant consultants on the back looking at the expenditure line item. So grant consultant was unbudgeted. We'll currently evaluate that, see where we're going to charge it. But right now that's on a line item that has zero budget. The tax assessment department 620, we have a line item for the 125,000, which again, if you recall during budget season, hopefully within the next couple of months, we'll be coming forward to the council looking for the passage of a resolution or ordinance allowing us to transfer that 125,000 into a special revenue fund called the Reval Escrow Fund, so that we could put that money aside to help pay for the future full revaluation. And then the contingency account, the charge that you see in there right now is related to Dynamics. Although that was budgeted last year, the work started in the current fiscal year. That's where the payment's shown. And to date, we're still working on finalizing the paperwork, I think, with the trust for the OPEB contribution. As soon as that's finalized, we'll be contributing, again, the $100,000 that was planned with which would hit the contingency account. So that's where we're at. For 24. Again, it's early on, but there's nothing alarming. I think there's some good signs. Hopefully the revenue can continue to come in. We're anticipating we'll be in good shape.
Council Ludwig.
I don't know if we went through it so quickly or just was skipped. So item number 5.
Yes.
Maybe the solicitor can review it. This does not include, so just to say, I did get your email yesterday, but I did not have time to print it. So I'm going off of the sheet that you just gave us.
Yes.
Does not include all invoices for August.
Yes.
It's estimated to be at 150.
Yes. So
I think we budgeted for this year. Was it 400 or 450?
I believe it's 5 change. I thought.
535. So do
Yeah.
I know there's a process here of kind of finding all the old invoices, getting some of those groups out. How do we kind of, I don't know if I'm looking at this properly, but if we're at 500 and we've basically I guess I ask a question. Have we spent 150K on solicitor fees, not just for yourself, but for the
Yeah, it's all
town
the attorneys. That's
in 2
on
months?
on the report you have, I believe it shows around 100,000, just over 100. And what I was saying here, there were some additional fees that got posted in September, just because when the invoices came in, they got listed in the system in September, therefore they didn't show here. So yeah, through 2 months, we're probably 140 to 150 spent or cost incurred. Now, obviously, we can continue to monitor that as we go, see if we have to do line item transfers, or hope really is that some of the issues that we've had are winding down and we'll be able to have savings going forward.
Or is it being paid like quarterly or something? Is that something that we should expect every month? Because then that would be pretty concerning.
Solicitor Angel.
No, I don't expect it every, excuse me, I don't expect it every month, but we've had extraordinary expenses and we've had bills that were left over, quite frankly. I don't want to get into names, but I think the council's aware that I've terminated 2 law firms that did work for prior administrations. They saved their bills. And they were dropped on us. The extraordinary litigation expense related to unanticipated litigation, Center of New England that continues, and the expanded litigation with Johnson's Pond has been a significant drain on resources for sure. We've been able to create some economy scale in prosecutions, which I scaled back what we did there. It changed horses. Planning and zoning is down based on usage, but I do expect it to go back up with the activity that we're going to have here. We've had some extraordinary activity related to getting ready for this and some other things that, we really didn't have a sense of how much work was going to be involved, for example, in some of these things. We just didn't have, we knew it was going to go up. One of the things that I'm working with Mr. Civetti on is to piece together what had happened in years past. Because based upon the usage that I saw and the number of attorneys that were employed by the town, that money had to be coming out of a separate line item in the budget somewhere. Had to be. There's no way it was stagnant at 400,000. I think we're all in agreement on that. I don't know. We're never going to find out where it came from, but I think what we can do is reconstruct, 24 months and say, how much went out into who, if that's possible. That just gives us a better sense of
Okay, so
usage.
I'm not asking for that. I think your time would be better spent on just looking forward rather than figuring out where we pulled in the past. As a council, I believe we've said yes to the strategy with Johnson's Pond, yes to the strategy with Center of New England. So I'm not concerned about how did we do it in the past. I'd rather your time focus on, can we come up with some sort of budget here that we have a better understanding of what we're facing going forward? Okay. Thanks.
Vice President LeBlanc.
I would actually like to echo Councilwoman Ludwig's comments, because 150 divided by 2 months is 75. 75 times 12 is 900,000. So you're looking at like 300, 400K overspending if we were to go on the same path. So I completely agree with the comment that it is concerning. My other question though, with the school's letter, FY22 deficit, FY23 deficit, assuming we're going to have an FY24 deficit, just because things are pretty consistent usually in the accounting world. What happens to all these, like number 7, like we want to roll this 125 into next year, but if you have a deficit, you're going to need all funds from all line items to fund said deficit. So would you be able to still roll these funds over to the next year? Or what would your recommendation be? Would be my question.
Yeah, my recommendation is, again, we look at the town side, we really had, although we're one entity, realistically, there's 2 separate budgets. So
Sure.
the school has their budget. They obviously, if they run a deficit, they have to come up with a mechanism how they're going to fund that deficit. That would, similar to proposal they just put forward, that they're going to fund their 700,000 by asking for 140,000 from the town each of the next 5 years.
Plus 4% increases.
Plus 4% increases. So I think from the town side, my recommendation is we still manage the town the way we have to manage the town. I think it's prudent for us to put that 125,000 into a fund, because if not, 2 years from now, when we have to do the reval, you're looking to increase just that budget line item by about 400,000 to cover the cost. So I think we still need to manage the town's budget, monitor where we're at, and then, just try to stay on top of the school and get, whether it's quarterly updates, monthly updates, something from the school to see where they are. Again, meetings with the school, they've indicated that they think they're going to be on budget and there will be no deficit for the current fiscal year. I understand your concerns, but until we get, partway through the year and we can evaluate that, I'd hate to see us change where we are with the town and what the plans are to make sure the town's moving forward because we're worried about a deficit on the school side.
Thank you.
And lastly, debt services update. This is on page 114 in our packets.
Yeah, so the council had asked us to update the long-term debt analysis or the schedule that we had, which was previously provided at one of the school construction or building committee meetings. So I've updated to reflect the balances outstanding on the various bond obligations or loan obligations, including the intermunicipal agreements with the town of West Warwick. So the balances as of September 22nd, 2023 are OPEB obligations. So we list those various obligations here, including, you get the police pension plan has an unfunded obligation of approximately 60. So that's 54 million. So the total other long-term debt obligations amounts to roughly 165 million for total outstanding bond and these other long-term debt obligations of 210,980,964. Now, at the bottom of the page, I indicate for you, on the state law indicates you have a maximum debt limit of 3% of your assessed value. So if we look at our current assessment, which is as of 12/31/2022, the town's legal debt limit is approximately 153 million. Now, just keep in mind that debt limit is really just restricted to the bonded debt. It does not take into consideration the sewer fund debt, which are revenue bonds, as well as the intermunicipal. And also it does not look at those other obligations. So the OPEB liability and pension liabilities. But those, again, were included here because you would ask to see the total long-term obligations. So really that town's legal debt limit of 153 million applies specifically to the 31,322,000 in outstanding general fund bond obligations.
Vice President LeBlanc.
I appreciate this listing. Can you, I guess, the most recent financial statement is 6/30/21, but our liabilities exceeded our assets by about 114 million.
Significant amount, correct? Yeah.
So while I appreciate what you just said, that this 153 can go against that $30 million number, we have to think of our financial statements in totality. And I wouldn't want to add another $100 million of debt to our liabilities already exceeding our assets by 100 million. So that would just put us in a really bad spot, but just my 2 cents. Because he's effectively, I'm rough estimate.
Any other comments, questions? And we're posting this report as well on the finance page of the website. Okay, that'd be great. All right, thank you very much. Moving to report of the solicitor. Solicitor Angel, ratification of revised solar agreements.
So you may recall at the last council meeting, excuse me, I'm a little froggy fighting a cold, that there were 2 agreements related to the landfill solar project, one of which was a solar power agreement. We came in here with the understanding that the PRP group had signed off on the draft. That information was wrong. I've been in contact with legal counsel for the PRP group, who's David Graham. And he had sent me his comments on the solar power agreement. We'll be integrating those. They wish to be a signatory to that agreement. That's the major change. No other substantive changes. We'll be getting that done. The town manager will sign it. You'll see it again for re-ratification, but we were misinformed, both WSD and the town, as to the PRP group's sign off on that. So for the record, David Graham has never spoken with a solicitor for the town of Coventry until he and I spoke. Just thought I'd point that out. He didn't even know what the role of the solicitor was. That's correct. In our town, how it worked, it works differently. It works differently in other states and commonwealths than it does in Rhode Island. He had no idea.
Any comments, questions for the solicitor? Thank you very much. Moving on to resolutions of the council, item A, resolution 2023-76 to enter into an agreement for the purchase of body worn cameras for the Coventry Police Department with Axon Enterprise Incorporated, 17800 North 85th Street, Scottsdale, Arizona. This is on page 115 in our packets. Do I hear a motion to approve the resolution to start discussion?
I'll make the resolution. I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Vice President LeBlanc, second by Councilmember Shockley. Chief Heiss.
This resolution is to purchase 30 cameras to outfit our patrol division. It'll be the licenses, the software, the accessories, and everything to run the project. It'll be, what we're looking to do is use impact fees to do the initial purchase. It'll be reimbursed through the statewide body camera grant. And we would hope that the money we put back in the impact fees once it was reimbursed.
Manager Parrillo, any comments?
This is something I've been working with Chief Heiss on since I came. Obviously, this is the new wave of policing, and I think it's very, very important that we become part of this program. So this is a 5-year agreement. We're just asking the council to approve 1 year at a time because the source of the funding may change over the next 4 years. So for now, this year, we're going to use impact fees, and then once we get reimbursed, we'll put those back. But it's a really important piece of policing going forward. Now, I know there's going to be training involved. It's going to affect the public information officer regarding release of information and so forth. I know Solicitor Angels worked with Captain Witt about how this is going to happen. So it's an important resolution in order to kind of get us where a lot of other departments are and really protect our officers, because I think they're doing a great job out there, and sometimes the cameras just are there needed just to kind of support them. So I think that's it's a worthwhile investment that the council is going to make in their police department. Thanks.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Chief, are you going to need a new headcount to supervise? And I mean, I'm assuming there's going to be a ton of recording that they're going to have to go through. If there's ARPA requests, documentation requests for said video footage, that's going to take time. Are you going to need another person to oversee this?
So we're going to actually move another officer to help that division out within the department itself. We're not going to add on to it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Councilmember Shockley.
So because we have the money right now and we know we're getting it back, instead of coming up with a new way to fund this every year, can we just put that money into a specific escrow account for this for the next 4 years? We'll give it to them, they'll give it back. We'll give it to them, they'll give it back. And then we don't have to think about this on an annual basis. We have the money right now from the impact fees. Is there a reason we wouldn't just continue to use it over the next 4 years?
Well, the original resolution was for 5 years, 260,000 up front. I didn't know if this council could legally lock in for the next 5 years that type of money. So I thought it'd be best to go year by year, because some years maybe impact fees, other years maybe other methods of funding. So I thought it was best to go year by year with this program, even though it's a 5-year.
Yeah, I like the year by year of it. I just wasn't sure if we could do some sort of revolving fund that just close it at the end of this 5-year period.
You can't move the impact fee money out to a different fund. You have to take it out of that and put it back, take it out.
So it has to go back into the impact fees. So even with that, just don't you commit the impact fees to this, or at least make every attempt to. I mean, we have a place that the money came from, and then we're going to get it back.
For this year, it's impact fees. Like I said, I don't know if the impact fee is going to be an option in the next, over the next 4
Or
years.
if they're even going to be the amount needed.
Yeah, I really can't project if that 54,000 is going to be there over the next 4 years as we spend down that impact fees for other things. There's another resolution coming in front of you next month to ask for about $100,000 of those impact fees.
So I guess
Or
what I'm
something
saying
different.
is, let's not do that. And instead commit these impact fees to this for the next, even if we do it on a year over year basis, coming up with $52,000 from somewhere every year is difficult. We are coming up with it right now, and we're going to get it back. It just seems like, I mean, how many years did we go without even getting the impact fees? I don't see any reason why we couldn't just earmark it.
We can put it in the budget too for next year. We can put it right into the budget if we wanted to as well. There's options, I think.
Yeah, I like that option too. I'm just saying, we have this kind of unicorn where the money exists, and we're going to get that money back for it could be for our next payment, if this is the amount that it's going to be.
Yes.
Without a doubt, for the next 5 years.
Council Ludwig?
Thanks for coming in, Chief Ice. So let's say this was approved tonight and you put the order in. Is this something like, 3-year backlog for this stuff, or when are you going to possibly get this?
About
equipment?
2 to 4 weeks for the equipment to come in, about 12 weeks for the training to be completed. So we're thinking maybe around a January 1st rollout of but we're probably doing a pilot program of 1 shift as we get started.
I do, or I am interested, similar to Vice President LeBlanc, on how we're going to manage those APRAs and all of that, because I get sucked into the internet every night before bed, and I'm watching the police camera things on my Instagram and things like that. So and then the harassment that comes in off of social medias and the people coming in asking for this information. And I think
it's gonna
big.
be a challenge. It is gonna be a challenge. So I think, like I said, under Captain Witt and the additional officer we put in that department, and I think it's gonna be a novelty too. I think people are gonna ask a lot in the beginning, and it's gonna wane because it's gonna be the same. Every department's gonna be doing the same exact thing. Once I think they find out that they're not gonna get what they think they're gonna get on a camera, I think the novelty of it's going to wear off. But I think up first, at the front, it's going to be a lot of work, but we're prepared to handle that.
The only thing that I don't know is whether the novelty will wear off, because Cops was filmed in the early 90s. And that is one of the biggest hits on syndicated television in the world. So please let us know. Come back and let us know how it's going and if anything else is needed, because I just think this is bigger than we may anticipate.
Solicitor Angel?
Thank you.
We've had, I won't say it's a dry run because it's nothing like a request for body cam footage. I've talked with other departments and solicitors as to what they're dealing with in terms of requests for this footage, because it's an APRA request. I've with the chief and the town manager's permission, I've been allowed to work with Captain Witt, and Captain Witt has discussed with me the process there. We've worked through some other issues related to APRA, which has led to this discussion about body cameras and what we would do. There are provisions within the Access to Public Records Act that provide a safe harbor if triggered by the municipality to provide adequate time and space for review of these things. The chief and his department, his captain, is aware that we must trigger those safe harbors right out of the gate, particularly as you go through lots of footage. For example, I know that everyone saw it on the news. Without getting into specifics, there was a particular arrest that was made in town perhaps 2 weeks ago, for which internal police department footage was released. That was in access to Public Records Act request that triggered some of a dry run on some of those protocols. They worked very well, worked with Captain Witt on that. And parenthetically, I thought your department looked great. Did a good job. Thank you. So the Attorney General said so. So
Any further discussion on the resolution? Hearing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Ludwig,
Yes.
Councilmember Shockley,
Yes.
Vice President LeBlanc,
Yes.
President Lima,
Yes,
4 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, motion passes.
thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Item B, Resolution 2023-77 to enter into an agreement for asphalt paving improvements project to be paid with ARPA. Should be ARPA funds, not APRA, in the amount of $1,602,036. This is starts on page 116 of your packets. The resolution is on page 123. To start discussion, do I hear a motion to approve the resolution?
I'll make the motion.
Motion by
I'll
Vice
second it.
President LeBlanc, second by Councilmember Shockley. Director McGee.
Good evening. This resolution before you is a portion of the municipal road program that the state of Rhode Island is funding. The town requirement is for funding 2/3 of the amount, and the state will give us the following third. As it shows on the resolution, the town's part would be $1,602,036 with a match of 1/3 by $789,063 from the state. Together, these allow us to move forward with additional roads projects that we're looking at and to have nearly $800,000 as a grant as we can get significant roads done. So we're just asking the council to consider, we have to have this agreement between the state approved. Once I are able to provide that to them, they would do the purchase order and then the process can begin.
Manager Parrillo, any comments?
I just want to thank Director McGee. He's been all over this grant once it came out. He was right on it. One of the first ones in the state again, like in planning, to get it approved and pretty much hit the pavement running.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Discussion from members of the council. I'm happy to see that we're making this allocation of funds. It seems like I've been talking about paving roads since I've been on the council. I'm happy to see that once again, we had our act together enough as a town to get to the front of the line and really take advantage of this program and be fortunate enough to have ARPA funds available to match. This is a huge investment in roads, and I applaud this council and our director for making this happen.
Thank you.
Vice President LeBlanc.
Director McGee, hopefully going forward during budget sessions, you can stop saying that we only gave you $80,000.
I will definitely, I will stop saying that. Thank you. And just another note also, we have a lot of programs and grants that we have applied for. Another $500,000 on this community development block grant application for the low mod areas. We are signatory on these Safe Streets for All with the entire state, in which we will be looking to monitor and do arterial and collector roads around schools to include not only roads, but sidewalks. So we're moving along with the roads program, thanks to this council.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Ludwig,
Yes.
Councilmember Shockley,
Yes.
Vice President LeBlanc,
Yes.
President Lima,
Yes,
4 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, motion passes.
Thank you.
stay there.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I assume you're here for item D as well.
I am.
Okay, so why don't can I have a motion to take the agenda out of order?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Vice President LeBlanc, second by Councilmember Shockley. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Ludwig,
Yes.
Councilmember Shockley,
Yes.
Vice President LeBlanc,
Yes.
President Lima,
Yes,
4 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, motion passes.
Item D, Resolution 2023-79, vote to approve change order number 1 to Cardi Corporation for contract agreement dated July 10th, 2023 for the asphalt pavement improvements 2023 project, pages 127 to 136 in our packets. Do I hear a motion to approve the resolution?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
Motion by Vice President LeBlanc, second by Councilmember Shockley. Director McGee.
Yes, part of the entire process of applying for this grant from the state was cooperation by Cardi Corporation of them holding the prices, all the unit prices that they were awarded during the current project. So what we did, we went back out and looked at the roads that we could do within all the districts and try to equitably try to keep all the districts with the same basic amount of dollars to have 29 additional roads done. Most of you folks are going to have 5, 6 to 8 roads in each of your districts. Unfortunately, the one district that's going to have 1 road is District 1, Mr. Pasqua. But that road, by using a different process, which Cardi will not be doing, this is something that we're going to use. It's called a coal-in-place recycling. We were able to save about $300,000 by doing this, which will come in front of this council in the springtime because they're already booked up for the rest of this year. And we have until the end of 26 to finish this program by the state. But we'll come back out into the state MPA for this company, which is Indus, that's gone out throughout the state, and be able to put that back out in front of the council. So that $536,000 is about $100,000 more for all of you folks, districts. However, to do that road, which is nearly 2 miles long, Cars Trail, would take 3 years of him doing a portion of that road in order to make his allotment fit in with the rest of the council. So I made the decision that we're saving money and that we're going to be able to get that road done, which is a collector road from the newly paved Sisson Road all the way to Route 117.
Smart. Vice President LeBlanc.
I believe this is germane to the discussion. Cardi's been in the news lately.
Yep. They are.
So are we tracking what's going on there?
Yeah, they are. They have been purchased by Peckham, and who also bought Miozy, and they're located in North Kingston. They're the parent company, but they're still operating under Cardi.
Got it.
To the end of this fiscal calendar year, excuse me. And the bond is in place, and I'm not concerned. Tomorrow they will be milling the last 4 roads of the contract, and then they'll be paving the last 5 roads by their contract deadline date, which would be October 10th, be substantially complete.
Got it.
They will make the contract.
Solicitor
I
Angel.
just didn't want to be fronting them a lot of.
No.
No,
They're
No,
the other way around.
we, Director McGee and I have been in discussion on this. It's been a concern of mine. It's no secret that unfortunately the Cardi Corporation has been sold. So there's really the paving piece, which was purchased by Peckham, and the other piece, which was purchased by Manafort. So their main base of operation at 400 Lincoln Avenue in Warwick will be occupied by Manafort. All contracts are being honored, and the big question is, where's their bonding? Right in place.
Thank you.
Further discussion from members of the council? Hearing, any further?
Just one other question. You'll notice there's a difference between the 1.5 that we're asking for the change order.
Mhm.
We've noticed in this contract, some of the roads that they're going to mill, there's only an inch of pavement there, and they're right down to gravel. So we're having to put a little bit more, put some binder down and top to do it correctly. So I left a little bit of wiggle room in case we encounter that in these 29 roads. If we don't, then we'll do some additional roads that weren't on the original list. But I did the 5-year projection, and I'm pulling from that 5-year projection to get all of these roads done. So just to let you know.
Great. All right. No further discussion. Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Ludwig,
Yes.
Councilmember Shockley,
Yes.
Vice President LeBlanc,
Yes.
President Lima.
Yes.
4 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, motion passes.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Item C, Resolution 2023-78, vote to release the guarantee known as Whitetail Estates in the full amount of $90,610.98. The approval for the approved development known as Luba Road and Iron.
The stipulations per the 2 directors and the planning commission.
Solicitor Angel, any comments?
They've met it.
Discussion from the council? Council Ludwig?
So I see that the applicant says Ironwood Land Company. I don't know about all the different corporations, but, or companies, but I believe this was the same builder who built my neighborhood that's right down the street from me. And I know Doug's not here anymore, but, some of the issues that we saw in our neighborhood that we would have thought would hold up a bond return didn't seem to happen a few years ago. So I don't know if either of you might be able to just walk us through what is the process that Director McLean and the engineer went through to feel good about releasing their bonds here.
I can't speak to their internal process. There's obviously an inspection that goes on. It works based on percentages of completion. But I can tell you that this process has been problematic in the past as to the percentages that are released. That process is under review right now by me, the town manager, and the planning office with respect to how those funds are released in a more laddered basis, because really there's no incentive for a developer to do very much. You know, if you're withholding the last 10% or 20% or whatever it is, depends on what the amount is. They may say keep it, and there isn't enough for the town to fix the problem. So we're moving hopefully in a different direction, which we can say more on, but I don't know specifically what their internal inspection process is. But given where they are in terms of their percentages of completion legally, we can't hold it.
Can I ask one more question about that piece? So when we say legally we can't hold it,
We don't have grounds.
we don't have any grounds. And I noticed in the letter it says, I guess on our side, we have some sort of 2-year maintenance period needing to be complete, but that's actually not right. But in the resolution itself, on the second bullet, it says Coventry subdivision and land development regulations allow for the guarantee to be released after 2 years. So are we just saying that that's what it says now, but we know that it's wrong?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's what we're looking for.
Okay. So you're looking to do the tiered system in lieu of just this blanket 2-year. Okay. Thank you.
So that it's more equitable in terms of the percentage of the project that's left to be done.
Okay. Thank you.
Further discussion from the council? Hearing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Ludwig,
Yes.
Councilmember Shockley,
Yes.
Vice President LeBlanc,
Yes.
President Lima.
Yes.
4 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, motion passes.
Moving on to public comment for undocketed items. Are there any members of the public here in council chambers who'd like to make a public comment on an undocketed item? Any members of the public on Zoom? Public comment on undocketed items? Raise your hand. Going once. Going twice. 3 times. Public comment is now closed. At this time, I'll seek a motion to adjourn at 8:55 PM.
Make the motion.
I'll second.
Motion by Vice President LeBlanc, second by Councilor Shockley.